So I was recently thinking how there's really a Linux issue for everything, going from fanboys to smart TVs. But I've already said this many times beforehand and made many videos about that in the past. And I was recently thinking about this one in particular, and what really can be considered the most useless Linux issue of them all, and what can really be considered a useless Linux issue due to there being so many. Well, there could be multiple factors of what can make a Linux issue useful and useless, like hardware, features, functionality, and what really makes it stand out from the rest of the crowd. And we'll get into some of that today. So first, we'll start with one of the most important aspects, hardware. Hardware is a pretty important aspect of the Linux experience, because what else are you really going to run on? Like a dead badger or something? Holy shit, that's actually possible? What the fuck? But it's still a pretty important aspect of the Linux experience, as the more hardware your distro can run on, the more useful it will be. Like for example, if your distro only runs on like MacBooks or something like that, they'll be more useless than a distro that can run on anything due to only being on MacBooks or something else that's similar to that. So that only eliminates like 95% of all distros, only leaves like the hardware niche ones. Kinda, because even if your distro can run on anything, it can still be considered useless. Some of these distros, including ones like Alpine Linux, a Linux distro that instead of using the GNU core utils, use some SNCA that nobody gives a shit about. And well, why the hell would you use anything besides the core utils in the first place? It worked good enough as is. Or Parallels, which is literally just Debian, or well, now Arch nowadays for some reason, but with an identical Mac OS like Rice for some reason, which even though Mac is not open source, is still based on Unix-like systems like FreeBSD. To be exact, plus, why would you want a Mac-like experience on Linux anyway? Now we also gotta consider another factor like support. While some of these distros are still getting updates, meanwhile the OS hasn't been updated since like the Bush administration or something, making them kinda useless as well. You can't really run any modern programs on these at all. Or just making them straight up useless like GOS, a web app themed Linux distro that is now completely useless due to an entirely based off web apps, and while for example now browsers can't really work on it. But Linux distros that have been updated since like 2022 also fit into this category when it applies to like a shit ton of Linux distros, but still a pretty important aspect to think about in the first place. But we also gotta answer the question about functionality, which is actually more important than anything else on here. Where some of these distros while ending up have next to no functionality, or it's just done better by another distro. Like for example, I know this is kind of like a weak example, but for example the Ubuntu flavors, which is just straight up Ubuntu but with a different desktop environment. Same program, same snap garbage and all, but with a completely different desktop pre-installed, instead of GNOME, which yeah, you can't do that on the standard Ubuntu version in the first place. That's like the only example that you could think of as well. But there's also trying things better, like for example, Kali Ubuntu, I think that's how you pronounce it, compared to Myth Ubuntu for smart TVs. But the whole smart TV genre when it comes to Linux is really a topic for another day. Maybe a future video or something, who knows. So after going for all these examples and all these rankings, we can actually determine that one distro is actually the most useless of them all. And it's actually one that I haven't mentioned yet. And yeah, it came out for the fucking iPod out of all things. And it's actually named the very creative name of iPod Linux. A Linux distro meant for the iPod music player that you probably never heard of. And it says that it's supposed to make the iPod open source, in quotations of course. Its features listed on its Wikipedia page include stuff like an iPod-like interface, support for the AAC, MP3, and OGG audio formats, which iPods also support by default, besides OGG, but we ain't even using that outside of like wikis and open source extremists in the first place. Some games like a Tetris clone and a Dance Dance Revolution clone, which is cool and all, like I get it, I like Tetris, but the iPod can run the original fucking Sonic the Hedgehog for God's sakes, so that's not really impressive, but it actually does have one thing going for it. It actually has better audio recording output than the original iPods, which yeah, that seems pretty good, but who the hell is recording audio on an iPod in the first place? Just do that in like a computer program like Tendacity or something. It also has support for Doom 1, 2, and Chex Quest, which would be impressive if Doom literally couldn't run on anything, including the iPod obviously, but not the Neo Geo for some reason. I don't really get that. And it can also run emulators, you know, just like the iPod can, just with a little bit less tweaking, of course. So, in conclusion, there's really no point on installing this in the first place instead of just using the standard iPod, the operating system. But it's not even worth it going for this shit in the first place, as it hasn't been supported in over 19 years. So there is really no point in going through this. Plus, it has no full support for any iPods. With the 3G, which mind you has the highest support, so having some partial supports for some things or something, I don't really know, but it's still pretty important, like fucking USB. So, what is my final verdict from this video? Well, some of these distros are worth going with, and most other distros are fine to go with as well for your own personal experience. But there's probably some other that you should stay away from and not even bother using in the first place, especially if they haven't been supported since Bush was in office, for God's sakes. So, keep using Linux, my brothers, and have a wonderful day.